think I know some, but not many of you. I'm Traian. I'm based in Bucharest, in Romania. I'm a PTSTA in the organizational field, and I spend a lot of my days working in a big multinational company, while also doing consulting work on the side, and of course the whole supervision and training bit that comes with the PTSTA role. And I think, like Paul and among other of us who are developing this project, I'm very keen on the ideas and the philosophy of co-creative TA, and I'll dig deeper into that as we progress tonight. That's pretty much on me. Paul?
Yeah. Hi guys, I'm Paul Robinson. I'm like Traian. I'm a PTSDA, and I work I'm an educational PTSDA. Work mostly on supporting people to develop and change, personally or in organisations. And I'm based in Ipswich in the UK, and some of you are join our training sessions. And I've been using co-creative TA for a lot of years, supporting people to develop and change. And Traian and myself took our TEW together in Santiago in Spain about 6 years ago. Close to 6 years ago. Yeah. So we've been working with some of the other people who took the TEW with us to generate this whole program with Keith and Graham. So there's 8 of us involved, and we've been working on it for about 6 months. So it's nice for it to be happening. So that's us.
Very much so. And I think we're curious, to go around the room, the virtual room, to hear your names and a bit about your experience with co-creative TA, or with TA in general, just to get a glimpse of who's where with all of this.
Because us knowing just roughly what, do you know anything about co-creative TA or nothing, or you're here to learn a little bit, or you use it a lot, will be really helpful so that we know where to pitch things in the workshop. So over to you guys. Don't fight to go first.
Hello, I'm Sandra. My background, I'm a business psychologist of several decades and an executive and team coach. So I work in predominantly the field of the working environment as opposed to therapeutically. I'm new to co-creative TA. I came across Keith and Graham's article when co-creative TA was for them embryonic. It's now developed a lot more. I was intrigued by it because, if you like, the underpinning values really align with how I like to work as a coach, as a facilitator, and so on. So I'm here with interest and just wanting to hear and learn more.
Thanks, Sandra.
Hi everyone, I'm Camilla. Nice to see you all. I am a lecturer in psychology, have been for the last 20 years. I've relatively recently started my journey into TA, so I'm in year 2 of a 4-year TA diploma, with a view to moving into private practice eventually. Co-creativity is quite new to me, but like Sandra, is something that kind of instantly I clicked onto because it kind of fits with my personal philosophy. So yeah, I've done a little bit of reading of sort of Graham's work but yeah, relatively new really. So happy and excited to learn something. Thanks.
Thanks, Camilla. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Catherine. I'm a student. I'm doing the foundation course at Tato, and I qualified as a counsellor in the summer. I'd done an integrative course and was interested in TA. And if I'm honest, this email came in offering a few hours of training, and I jumped on it. So I don't even know what TA, what co-creativity is.
Okay, thanks.
Good.
Hi, I'm Freddie. I live in Milton, Ontario. Been working with Paul for a couple of years now, Paul, 2 years now. So I'm familiar with Paul's way of working with co-creative TA, and I've been learning along the way, reading the book by Tudor and Graham, and yeah, I'm on my journey. I'm also a high school math teacher, so I'm learning and bringing these principles into my classroom.
Thanks for joining, Freddie. Is it cold in Ontario?
Today's one of the coldest days in 2 years, so it's like -19 out there.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. At least you're nice and warm.
That's right.
Okay. Oh, go for it, Julie.
Sorry. Carry on, Claire.
Oh, thanks, Julie. Yeah, I'm Claire. I'm I've just graduated from a 4-year integrative, as in Richard Erskine integrative rather than integrative TA course in Manchester at the Manchester Institute for Psychotherapy. I've been a primary school teacher for 23 years, and I've used sort of TA concepts within my primary school teaching. But I'm making the change at the moment over. I've done full-time 4 days, 3 days, 2 days, and now I'm doing 1 day a week of teaching. And I'm just letting go in the summer, and I'm going to start my private practice. So my supervisor is really into the Tudor and Summers book of co-creative TA. So I bought that when I was on my placement, and I've read bits of it, and I'm really into it. I really love the integrating adult. I think that's one of my favorite parts of it. And I've been to a couple of these. I'm interested to know a bit more. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire.
Okay, I'm Julie. You both know me already.
Yeah.
I'm a TSTA, and I just thought this was a good opportunity to find out what you're both saying about co-creative TA. I do already know a little bit about it.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Ingrid. I've been a practicing TA therapist for, I don't know, I never remember how many years, 3 years or so. My therapist is really into co-creative work. So I think some of the concepts that he talks about sometimes I kind of resonate with me. So I bought the book, but I haven't read it. So I think I'm keen to kind of find out more about life in practice, as it were.
Right.
I'll go next. Hi everybody, I'm Nims. It's lovely to see you all. I am a organisational practitioner in my final stages of my CTA. I work in the civil service, so it's definitely an interesting place to practice TA. I know a fair bit about co-creativity in Paul's group. My supervisor, Debbie, uses co-creative TA. I use co-creative TA in my work, and I'm just curious to kind of hear a little bit more and connect with different people.
Thanks, Nims.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else want to share? Go on, Lee.
Yeah, I'll share.
Yep.
So I'm Lee. I'm from New Zealand. I'm in my 3rd year of training for TA with Joe Stuthridge. I originally got into the co-creative that Keith's my supervisor, so it just piqued my interest hearing him talk about it. So I read the book, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to these workshops to kind of help me really understand this co-creative in depth. So yeah, that's where I'm at. So kind of a general understanding, but wanting much more depth and richness.
What time in the morning is it in New Zealand?
It's 6, so
6.
I'm appreciating the irony of coming to a present-centered workshop, not feeling that present.
Right.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Okay, so we thought we would talk a little bit about a contract for us tonight before we got into the workshop, now that we've got some idea of what your backgrounds are. So we want to work co-creatively with you. So although we have got a plan, it's very sketchy, and we will go where you want to go. Yeah. Once our idea is to explore the basics of present-centeredness. We've got a task for you to do in breakout rooms, and we were going to have start off with a general conversation between myself and Traian about what we understand by present-centeredness, and invite you guys to join in. Does that sound okay? Yeah.
Sounds good to me, Paul. We did think about this already.
Yeah, and of course, co-creativity depends on you, because we can't be co-creative if you don't join in. So, and we don't know. It's interesting that Lee's here. He knows Keith's his supervisor, because Keith will say he doesn't know everything about co-creative TA either. And we've had some really good meetings planning these series of workshops with Keith and Graham, and they've developed it, and they're really interested in how people use it. So it's not written in stone or tablets or anything. It's like, these are the basics, and it's great to explore and use it. So we don't know everything, do we, Traian, about CCTA or present-centeredness. So we're just going to share what we think about it, and invite you to ask questions and comment.
Yeah, and what you're saying, Paul, it's something that I picked up in the intros. It's not about knowing about co-creative TA, or at least that's not our invitation to all of us, to all of you. It's about seeing how each of us is looking at it, is resonating with the theory, is resonating with the concepts. How is this fitting into your work potentially if you're already using it, based on the theme that we have on tonight or this morning for some. And hearing the intros was interesting, because a lot of the resonance that pulled you towards co-creative TA, I think I found very interesting on my own too, because I to a degree, I think it offered meaning and words to something that I was already looking for and I was already doing as a practitioner. Let's say on top of perhaps what the other TA concepts or philosophies were already allowing in my work. So I did resonate a lot with what you already said in the intro section for many of you. So Paul, let's get a bit of a dialogue going, because we both of us have talked about co-creative TA tonight. Today we're talking about present-centeredness. Go ahead.
I'm just wondering whether we should just share my screen and just, because I'm conscious
go through some of the concepts.
Didn't really know what co-creativity is about.
For some, yes.
Yeah. So let's just check with everybody and just run through the basic principles so that we've got everybody's got an idea or a basic idea of what, when we talk about being co-creative, what do we mean? So this is taken from Tudor and Summers' original article and of course the book. So there are 4 principles of co-creative TA. We-ness. So it's about us being okay in relationship with others. So it's about me and you being we and being together and working together. And 1 + 1 equals 2.5. So we can access more resource if we work co-creatively together. And we've got this concept of we-ness, which I know Traian always talks about, and Keith talks about homonymy instead of autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to say more, Traian?
Sure. I mean, briefly, we're going to cover some of these concepts and then dig deeper into present-centeredness. For me, we-ness is very important, and perhaps I'm influenced by the work that I do in organizations. But I think for me is key. The way we look at the we-ness, and throughout the years, there's a lot of emphasis on individual development, individual leadership development, thriving to foster an individual growth, and so on. And more, I believe in this idea of working together in groups, teams, and within organizations. So for me, that's really key. And I think it's putting the words on something that we long for anyway, we thrive for anyway. So for me, it was really important when I've seen this named, I clicked with it quite easily.
Okay. Any comments for anybody? Any questions? Okay. So the second principle is shared responsibility. And in co-creativity, it's very clear that it's not equal responsibility in the we-ness. So it's not a symbiosis, and that the not equalness can change from minute to minute. So sometimes, if Traian and myself are working co-creatively, hopefully we're doing that tonight, sometimes I'll take more responsibility than Traian, and sometimes Traian will take more responsibility from me. And then hopefully you guys will take some responsibility as well, so that the responsibility for the learning tonight will shift around. Yeah? Because you will all have things to contribute that can support the learning. Yeah. I think one of the things that begins to come in here is this accessing our and being vulnerable, because if we're going to share the responsibility, we've got to be vulnerable at times. Traian?
Yeah, I wouldn't add anything on this. I would move into the present-centeredness bit, and this is equally important as I've mentioned, the we-ness, and it's about us noticing, accessing, and separating our archaic thoughts, feelings, and impulses, which can get in the way, to being spontaneous. Also, as Bern was saying, the ability to be spontaneous and have options and be present or be aware, as he was calling it. Honestly, when I look at present-centeredness, and we'll talk more about it, I find it as a rare trait, or as a rare happening, let's say. So I'm looking at present-centeredness as an aspiration of the way we are and the way we work, and it's an ongoing care to bring this into our awareness. The level of present-centeredness that we're experiencing. That's my take on it. It's not something that comes as a default very easily. Paul, anything you'd like to add here?
Yeah, I think for me, the more that I work co-creatively, the more I realise that we are not often in our adult ego state. We rely so much on patterns so that we don't have to be thinking all the time and working things out, that when you really get down to it, we don't actually spend a lot of time in our adult ego state. We spend a lot of our behavior is automatic, it's patterned, and if we're going to be present centered, we've got to spend a lot of energy, and we've got to really account for what's going on, and we've got to access our past and the introjects, and we've got to access feelings, and we've got to be vulnerable, because we've got to choose to do something that is appropriate in the here and now, and it's not often that we do that. So the last tenet is something that I added through a TAJ article last year or the year before, which is mutual positive regard, which comes from Carl Rogers, who talked about unconditional regard, positive regard. And to me, it was always implied in the first three tenets that Keith and Graham developed. And it's about being okay. It's about treating people with respect, and also treating ourselves with respect, because very often we can treat other people with respect and we discount ourselves. So it's about mutual positive regard with others and about ourselves, and accounting for others and accounting for ourselves. So altogether, it's all about how do we work together? How do we share the responsibility? How do we work present-centeredly, and how do we treat people positively? Okay, bring you back. Any comments? Any questions? Anybody want to argue with us? Disagree with us? Or was that useful? Was that helpful? Yeah.
Just to set the stage a bit, and
yeah.
you know.
And
it is our take.
So I'm just sort of thinking in terms of contracting. Then, so how would you kind of put some of that stuff possibly into the contracting in terms of owning the awareness possibly of some of the patterns we might get into, you know, if you have something with somebody else that kicks something off? I don't know. How do you think you'd put it into the contract? No, sort of what taking your own responsibility.
So I think it is difficult with the contracting. Co-creative contracting is rather difficult, because in traditional TA contracting, if you go back to Byrne and Steiner, who wrote a lot about contracting in a therapeutic relationship to start with, there's a power differential in a therapeutic relationship. So actually sharing the responsibility in a therapeutic relationship can be very challenging, both to the client and the therapist. So it's a really good question, and there is going to be a workshop on co-creative contracting, either February or March. So it is something that has been being looked at and explored, but it is difficult, and I think it varies between the different fields. You know, I know in talking with Keith often, and reading the co-creative book and the, you know, the response and some things, it is quite difficult at times for therapists to decide to be vulnerable with the client. Yeah, I mean, it does have a place, but it's about, you know, are you going to work as a therapist in the transference or with the transference? And if you're going to work with the transference, then there's going to be some vulnerability for you and for the client. And it's not always appropriate to do that. Similarly, in organizational context and an educational context and a counseling context, there's more times when they're more appropriate to introduce co-creativity into the contract. And it's not always right at the beginning when you first start a contract. It's a progressive thing, I think. Yeah.
I'd add, Paul, that, you know, even the idea of working co-creatively is bringing into awareness, into the discussion of the contracting piece, even these principles, among which is shared responsibility. So it's an overt invitation to have this, you know, discussed and contracted on. So that's why we use a lot of times the word invitation, because it's an invitation towards the, you know, the place of dialogue, of intersubjectivity, of interaction, you know, with different degrees, to Paul, you know, Paul, you were saying, depending on the stage, depending on the context, depending on the sensitivity, this all needs to be taken into account. But I think there is some richness and some strength into approaching things this way on the contracting side.
And I think it also depends on this thing that we'll get into later on this evening about are the other people in the room or in the relationship, are they able to be in their adult ego state? We can invite, but people don't always join.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think this goes back to probably why maybe in a therapeutic context, you might not start off with a co-creative contract, because the relationship needs to be different. And then you can progress towards more of a co-creative contract, so it develops. Whereas I think maybe even, you know, in an organizational context, sometimes, you know, the contract is good enough to start the work, and it might not be co-creative in its fullest sense, but that's what we're working towards. And you know, some of the things that we've done, Paul, in the next steps is, you know, how many permissions that we are providing and invitations we provide in our contract that allows for co-creativity to flourish in a relationship. And those are very overt. And I use this kind of same style in my relationships in coaching, where I know, you know, for a fact that my relationship with my client is not always equal, and I call that out because it's the truth, and I want my client to know about that. But I also invite them and let them know that we're working with these permissions, and it's okay, and I don't know the answers, and you know, we can work out together. So I would probably definitely agree with you, Paul, in terms of it's about, you know, starting and then developing the contract, starting with a good enough place and then progressing with that.
I think in organizational context and an educational context, you're working in a context where there is a power differential. There's a culture in organizations, there's a way that we do things around here. There's a purpose in an organization.
Yeah.
And in a learning environment, the younger the person, so with kids, they can't really share the responsibility for the learning because they don't know what they want to learn. Yeah, and so the teachers and the schooling system needs to take more responsibility. Yeah.
But I also, that's even a struggle even in adult learning because of our educational script. You know, we struggle with articulating, because there's that belief around, you know, the teacher knows what we need to know as students, and that doesn't go away easily. And I still experience it when I run sessions. You know, they just say, you're going to tell me what I need to know, and that's not true. So it's, you know, for me, it's trying to kind of invite people to access their curiosity and find out what it is that they are interested in and want to learn. And sometimes I see your faces looking blankly at me, much as you do, Paul.
Well, and I think, Names, you're bringing up an important topic. You use the word aspiration, and I think it is an aspiration, because we've got hierarchies, we've got, you know, different dynamics that come out in the room in organizational settings that are a default, or they're inherited. So, you know, in the contracting piece, because we're talking about contracting, it's a constant invitation towards presence-centeredness, and that can be in itself bumpy or scary or highly resourceful. So yeah, I like the word aspiration. I really like what you're bringing in.
Thank you.
Okay. So should we move it into a bit more about present-centeredness?
Yeah, let's do that, Paul.
Yeah. Should I share the screen and? Oh. So. So we'll give you an outline of what we're hoping to do tonight. So we've done the first bit, yeah. So we've looked at a bit like our contract and introductions, and we're really now looking at some relevant theory. And some of the things that the relevant theory is co-creative script. Yeah, so present-centeredness, our script gets in the way of being present-centered, because our script, we are always working to reinforce our script and our script beliefs, and we defend our script. We used symbiosis, rackets and games as co-creative confirmations for our script. We want to look at the winner's triangle because that's a way of getting out of script. We want to look at the integrating adult, Keith Tudor's integrating adult model, and how Summers and Tudor talk about co-creative relating with adult to adult interactions, transactions, co-transferential transactions, and partial transferential transactions. Yeah. And look at Keith's and Graham's view about expanding the adult instead of deconfusing the child. So those are the sorts of concepts that we're going to be exploring tonight. And please ask us questions and join in. So, where do you want to start, Traian? Where does anybody want to start?
Well, I'd start with a question to you, Paul, which is, and we could get a bit of a dialogue going. You know, present-centeredness has been around in TA for quite some time. I would say, you know, it's been called awareness. Warren talked about it, getting our, you know, regaining our ability to be aware. How do you see the difference, or is there a difference between how you look at present-centeredness, or how you see co-creatively the present-centeredness?
Okay, so I tend to think of it as the difference between a Burnian ego state view, or a Burnian view of an adult ego state, and Keith and Graham's slightly different views about adult ego states. I particularly like Keith's view of the integrating adult, which is a dynamic adult ego state. Whereas Burns' original writing, a lot of original writing around integrated adults, was about the adult ego state being computer-like and very logical, and very problem-solving-y. Whereas Keith and Graham both talk about a dynamism in the adult ego state in co-creativity. It's full of energy and full of curiosity. And much more, certainly integrating adult, Keith's view is that when we are in our integrating adults, we're in full contact with our past, so we're in contact with traditionally what we would call our child ego state, and we're in contact with our parent ego state. So we're actually aware of and in contact with those feelings that emerge when we get triggered into our child ego state, and we become defensive. We want to protect our script and our script beliefs, and we want to maintain power over what's going to happen. We all want to predict what's going to happen, keep ourselves safe. Whereas in an integrating adult and a co-creative present-centeredness, we're not worried about what's going to happen. We're not wanting to predict the future. We want to make an appropriate decision here and now, and we're going to be vulnerable if we're going to do that, because we lose track of what's going to happen. We can't predict what's going to happen. So from a co-creative perspective, present-centeredness can be really challenging, because we've got to be okay with being able to deal with what comes, not do our patterns so that we know what's going to happen.
So what comes across is you're seeing present-centeredness in a more dynamic manner, in an alive manner, perhaps compared to the awareness bit, or the way it was described by Byrne. And I think you're bringing, or we're looking also at it from what you said with the idea of vulnerability, which I think it's more of an add-on or a new nuance that co-creative thinking has brought into the theory and into the way we do things, which wasn't as much or almost at all in Byrne's thinking. At least that's how I look at it. If I look at the degree of prediction that he was looking for, that's for me, that's key. Into the unknown, working with the unknown, and being okay with it.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit like being in driver, isn't it? So it's the opposite to being in driver. So when we're in driver, it's about predicting what's going to happen, and I'll be okay if I do this. So
unconsciously, of course, we're doing that unconsciously.
Unconsciously,
we are still doing that. Yeah.
Because originally we generated those patterns for our driver so that we could feel okay as kids. And if we were okay, we knew more or less what was going to happen. Because our drivers enabled us to get recognition and strokes. So we knew if we were in driver, we would get those strokes, because that's why we developed our drivers in the way that we did, because that's how we got the recognition and strokes. So we developed patterns that enabled us to get the recognition and the strokes.
And that was the positive recognition. So would it be fair to say that in the present centeredness that we're talking about, would we let go even the expectation of the positive outcome, the conditional positive outcome that, you know, driver behavior was offering us? So is this a fair assumption to leave the, you know, the horizon open to not receiving the positive conditional outcomes that we were comfortable with or accustomed to? That's what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think it was positive for us as kids because it enabled us to survive, and it enabled us to get recognition and to get strokes. But that was when we didn't have any power. And now we've got the power, we don't need to be in driver because we don't need to rely on those ways of getting strokes and recognition.
Okay.
Yeah. Makes
sense. I'm curious how our short dialogue resonates with the rest. If there are questions or thoughts coming up that either, I don't know, agitate your thinking about present centeredness, or on the contrary.
I guess, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, very well.
Cool. Yeah, from the start, I've had this question: how do we define present-centeredness? What does this co-creative have a definition? Because as you talk about it, you launch into like the adult needs it to be able to. I guess when you're an adult, we need this, and yeah, I'm hearing awareness, and I have my own thoughts and my own subjective experience of what I think it feels like to be present-centered. But I am curious, as a starting point, if there is one in co-creative, what is present-centeredness?
Okay. Should we? Is this time to go into the diamond triad? Do you think?
Yeah. Well, the diamond might be one entrance. The integrating adult, what would be another answer? I think there are multiple answers to your question, Lior. But yeah, let's go with the diamond.
Okay. So, how are you familiar with this? Go on, Lee. Are you going to say something, or?
Yeah, maybe. It looks familiar, but I'm not completely sure. So perhaps.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So Tudor and Summers in the original article talked about transactions and transferential or non-transferential transactions. So if we are in adult to adult transactions, we are both present-centered. Yeah. At the bottom of the diamond, we can be co-transferential transactions. So neither of us is in our adult ego state. We're both playing games. We're both running rackets. We're both in drivers, and we get on really well together. Yeah. So because both of these are parallel transactions. If I just move the screen down, so present I, present you is that we're both in our adult ego states. Past I, past you, it's going to be parent-to-child transactions or child-to-child transactions or parent-to-parent transactions. And one of Byrne's rules of communication was that we can carry on forever if we're in parallel transactions. Yeah. But what they talked about and diagrammed is these intermediate stages of past I, present you, or present I, past you, where we are in transactions where one of us is in adult and one of us is in the past, either in parent or child. So we're actually in cross transactions, and there is an invitation for us to move into either to join in the game that, or the racket we're being invited into if we're in adults, or for the other person to join us in and have adult to adult transactions.
Graham called those stepping stones.
Yep. So from getting from the co-transferential transactions, so from getting out of the games and the rackets and the reinforcement of our script beliefs and out of driver, we are, if we're working co-creatively, we notice that we're in a past-centered relationship, we're in co-transferential transactions, and we move into present and cross the transaction. And then it's up to the other person to decide whether they're going to try and pull us back into the game and re-invite us to stay in the game, or the racket, or driver, or whether they're going to join us in adults. And that can be really challenging. If we notice we're in a game, or we notice a game invitation, it can be quite challenging to not join in the game, or not join in the racket, or not continue the symbiosis, because we don't know what's going to happen. We might upset somebody. He might not like us. So it's easier just to stay and play the game and run the racket. Stay in driver.
I think there's another side to that though.
Cool.
I think there's an element of making contact, and sometimes it's really difficult to make contact an adult if there hasn't been sufficient experience or difficulty in doing that. So maybe, you know, as a coach or a consultant or a therapist, they might be making contact in a different place in order to use the stepping stones to get back until there's enough of a relationship or, you know, security to be able to move them around. Otherwise, you know, it's how can you be attuned to your client? It'll be really difficult to make contact otherwise. So it can be two sides of it.
Absolutely, and very often if people are if they're running rackets and they're in patterns and they're in driver, we can use Paul Worth sequence contact doors to get the contact, stay in the contact, and that contact may be transferential transactions to start with, to enable those parallel transactions to happen and the communication to work, and then to slowly invite moving in through the contact doors, through the Paul Worth sequence, to invite them into that place that they really, really don't want to go.
And Paul, you touched on the diamond, and per Lee's question, if you can share also the integrating adult.
Of course.
Because I think it's, we touched one way to see, you know, how does present-centeredness feel? I think we talked about how does it feel in a relationship. And in a relationship with self, it's more about being or feeling into the integrating adult. If you go down, Paul, I think there was one with neo-psyche. You know, these words are describing how it might feel, and I think there is something to add here. It needs to be attuned with the context, with the present moment, because not all of this can be a default and integrating adult, but it can, you know, it can describe one. So I would, you know, I always look, what are the co-creative principle of winners, harmony, for example, and then how am I feeling? How is the other one feeling? And awareness, spontaneity, contact, those are all descriptions of how does it feel to be present-centered? How does it show up? And it can be, to Paul's point earlier, open to both the positives and the potential negatives that might come my way. And being open to it. Open not in a sense of careless, not by any means, but open in a sense of willing to learn and see what's there. And that willingness is quite far away from what we usually talk about when we talk about symbiosis, racketeering, script patterns, negative script patterns, and so on. So for me, this is a nice image reminding me of some of those states that you were asking about, Lee.
I always like the one in the middle of this one.
Which one?
The having and expressing relational needs. Because how often do we do that? How do we often acknowledge to ourselves even that we've got relational needs, and even more often, more rarely, how often do we express them to others? And we don't do it because we don't know what's going to happen when we do. So we lose control of predictability. So I think, Lee, there's a good one here for you. I think it's a really good description of knowing whether we're in our adult ego state or present-centered or not, in terms of, are we aware of our relational needs at the moment, and are we prepared to express them and share them?
And you can imagine that this is only a short list or few words that can express what this idea of integrating adult and present-centeredness is actually talking about, or pointing towards, I would say, more.
I think if we just pop into this diagram of Keith's, where he shows these arrows, where the adult ego state is in contact with the feelings, particularly in the child ego state. And how often do we acknowledge that scare, or the fear, or the joyfulness? And how often do we actually connect on a conscious level to what's going on for us in our child ego state? Because we've
conscious and present-centeredness manner, Paul, I would say.
So, say again, Traian.
Conscious and present-centeredness manner, because I think that's one of the differences that we might say, I'm acknowledging through regression, or am I acknowledging it in the present moment, and making sense of it as a resource through the integrating adult? There is a slight difference, but there is one there that co-creativity talks about.
And of course, as adults, we've spent years, haven't we, not keeping at bay those awful feelings that we experienced and we wanted to forget when we didn't get our needs met, or we felt shamed or guilty. And we're really good at protecting ourselves from feeling those feelings. And they're there. So if we are really in our adult ego state, we are vulnerable enough to actually acknowledge and feel those feelings that we've spent years covering up. So, other
questions or thoughts emerging for you when we go through these different concepts, different ideas of present-centeredness, before we invite you into a breakout room discussion that we were planning, Paul?
Yeah, I think Amy's got a question. No, that she stopped driving.
Question, I'd just like to say hi.
Hi.
In the spirit of present-centeredness, I'd like to arrive from my car, thank Paul for letting me in late, and I guess a need from me to actually join the group, because I heard you all having a chat earlier and introducing yourselves. I was aware that I wasn't able to do that. And so, hi, I'm Amy. Just about to finish my clinical year 3. My experience of co-creative is being in a group, which is based on co-creative principles. And I'm here out of intrigue, because the more I learn, the more questions I seem to come up with. So I just wanted to land, and thank you.
Okay, so I think that was a great example of being present-centered.
And sharing the responsibility. So thanks, Amy, for picking up on something that belongs somehow to the group and to
Pleasure.
Paul and I.
There was fear in turning my mic on and speaking. So
and you felt the fear and did it anyway, which is what present-centeredness is often about.
Yes.
Right. Anybody else? Anybody got any questions, or anybody want to add anything or comment or? Okay, Julie's not feeling good, so she's going to log out. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for letting us know, Julie. Hope you feel better soon.
Yeah, the same, Julie. She wrote you on chat, or how do you know?
Yeah, she sent me a chat message direct.
Okay, good.
So last opportunity to ask questions or comments before we invite you to do an exercise, I think. So if you don't want to do the exercise, you need to ask questions. Okay.
Let me play a bit with, let me be the DJ of the breakout rooms for a bit. Okay. So assign automatically.
You do that, and I'll share the screen so that we can tell you what we're going to invite you to do.
Great. Thanks, Paul.
So here we have an exercise that we are inviting you to do. So having had a general discussion, and Traian and myself talked about present-centeredness and shown you a few models, we invite you to go into breakout rooms as a group of 3s, 4s, I think, and discuss these questions. In your view, what having heard all this, what gets in the way of you or us being present-centered? Obviously, think about what might get in you away, and share that. How can we become aware of that limitation? How can we become aware of the fact that we are not being present-centered? Are there any clues? And once we become aware, how can we explore the real choices that we have? Not just the perceived choices or the ones that we're used to. And finally, what can help us to stay present and not revert back into our driver or our patterns or our rackets that are going to confirm our script beliefs? What can help us to stay present and really explore spontaneous choices? Yeah, the most appropriate response, the most appropriate behavior. Yeah. what helped Amy to face that fear and open herself up to us and say what she wanted to do and join the group? Because that's one of the most difficult things for anybody to do coming into a group late. So, have you got those? What gets in the way of being present-centered? How can we become aware of it? How can we explore the choices? And how can we stay present and make a free choice? Any questions? It's a bit like Mission Impossible, isn't it? Should you choose to accept this mission? You've got 20 minutes to decide.
20 minutes to do the mission. And the disk will self-destruct. Okay.
Yeah, and the outcome is whatever you come up with, we'll explore in the last hour and a half.
So everything is allowed and permitted.
Yeah, wherever you want to go.
Okay. So let's get it going.
Right.
Good.
Can I just double check with you? You will send us all the paperwork that you're showing us on the screen, and is that right?
We don't normally, but we can do if you want.
Great.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So yeah, it'll come. So I'll send it to Claire or Sue Oswald, and when you get the notification, the email to say that your CPD certificate's available, you can, because you're at this one, you get free access to the recording as well, so you can go back, you can go and watch the recording.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah. So
yeah.
When you get that email, I'll let Sue have the models. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So you should get it then.
Okay. So quite a few questions. I hope rich discussions emerged. Who wants to start sharing something that was relevant for them on either of those questions?
Well, can I start by saying that I was quite confused. I find this co-creative, to me, it feels very new. And, you know, I've just shared in the group, along with one or two others, that I'm quite new to TA. I'm only doing I shouldn't say only doing, but I'm doing the educational TA. Yes, the rephrase, you know, big yourself up. Yeah, so I was a bit confused, but I find this, you know, co-creative sort of TA very interesting, but I also feel not very knowledgeable about it. And then that stops me, and that's very childlike. So I'm really, and as I'm hearing myself, I feel really proud of myself because I'm able to articulate that, and I'm being very much in the present moment. Yeah. So, and I was just sharing again that I, even though I'm a teacher, and I really enforce that in my classroom, come on guys, look, if you don't understand something, you need to put your hand up. Well, how many times have I put my hand up? I've been hiding myself and then just about showing myself, and then I can't seem to do it. I've got this stuckness. I might get it wrong. I don't know what I'm talking about. That's never stopped me because I can, you know, ramble on forever if I want to, if I'm in the moment. So, but I've chose not to. So yeah, I think my limit was really maybe my knowledge, and because you've said how can we become aware of that limitation? Well, I was aware that I was in my child. Well, I'm not putting my hand up. So in order to be in my adult, I felt like I had to confess that. And I was, became a free integrating adult. And then you couldn't stop me. So I just feel but there's this really good sense of being spontaneous and making a different choice. And it doesn't matter what you say, but right now I feel very present. And I do bang on about it because, I've done a lot of mindfulness, and I can only say that, you tune into your, awareness, you hear the noises that you wouldn't necessarily hear, etc. So there's so many different ways of looking at it. So I don't know why, but I just feel very attracted to the word co-creation, and I feel excited by it, and so I'm now very present to hearing more about it. So I just feel like it's this new thing, and it's very exciting. So thank you.
Well, thank you for showing us how much co-creative TA you actually do.
No.
So yeah.
Oh, that's nice to hear. And you used the word is it did I hear this interrelational or relational? Yeah, relational needs.
Intersubjective or
that one as well. Thank you for putting that one in. And I was just saying again, even that word is quite attractive to me because it means connection, and that's what I'm all about. So and again, co-creation to me means if I don't understand it one way, I'm going to make it so that I can understand and develop a way, which is again what I'm trying to do when I'm in in schools. I struggled with communication as a child, even as an adult working in schools with children and teachers. But I think I'm really exploring that to do it differently. That's the only thing I can say. And I don't want to take up too much time now, so I'm going to be quiet. But that felt really good to just share that, because Paul, I don't know why you look so scary. I thought, when you were asking questions earlier, I thought, oh, Christ's sakes, if I don't know the answer, he's going to tell me off. So this is what I'm saying. I was really in my child. I thought, damn, I'm not saying a word. So it feels good to be really free just to express myself.
So we got a question from Lee just 20 minutes ago. This is how it is feeling like to be present-centered. I think it's, to use a bit of a more traditional concept of TA, is letting the phases emerge. And I think that's what we're witnessing. So again, our invitation is to share what you've been reflecting on, finding out in the breakout rooms that you've just been in, with the proper theory, concepts, or without. That's not about it.
That was great. Thanks very much. How does it feel to be present-centered?
Alive.
Right.
Yeah. Well, your energy is like pinged across the tiles. I can feel it in my yellow square. Thank you.
Oh, that's really nice. Is that about me, Amy? Wow. God, do you know what? I was inspired by what you had said, and I thought, God, come on, if she can do it, what's your problem? Why are you hiding when you've got so much to say? So, gosh, thank you. God, I'm a bit stunned now for words, so I'm just going to be quiet for once. Thank you so much. I feel even more validated now. Yay. Thank you. I feel real. But whoever wants to speak now, please go ahead.
Freddie, you were trying to speak. I think you were going to come in.
Yeah, I just want to respond to Harp's, especially the comment she made at the beginning about how confusing CCTA is. I think my learning over the last few months, out of probably a year, is that it's very intuitive co-creative TA in the sense that if I imagine myself as a baby, and if I smile at my mother and my mother smiles back at me, we have co-created a moment right there. It is, and if it is present me, present her, that's still co-creation. Even if it is transferential, it is still co-creating at that instant. It may be defended, it may be from my script, but that is present at that instant as it's happening. And I find that fascinating. It's a beautiful way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Freddie.
Yeah, nicely described there, like that. That's so simple, Freddie, isn't it? Just a simple interaction, and it's felt right there in the moment. We don't have to confuse it with so much dialogue of, and stories and blah, blah, blah. That's so simple. Yeah, really like that. Thank you. I've written that down so I can take it away. Thank you.
And actually, is it much different face to face or online, being able to be co-creative?
That's a really interesting question.
What do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say the same, Try. What do you think, Katrina?
Funnily enough, I've just started back face to face, and I have been working online. So it was a question really, I was almost thinking about myself, asking myself, as well as asking everyone here. And there's a difference, but not necessarily a huge difference. But I feel there is a difference. You can have more of a connection. You can have a connection online, but there's certainly I think you can have more of a connection in the room together.
I mean, one of the things that gets in the way of being co-creative in any relationship is the safety. And there's an added level of safety when you're on Zoom.
Is there though? Yeah,
because I can press a button, you can all go away.
I mean, in that respect, that's right.
Yeah, I think also on Zoom, I mean, sometimes I've had clients and they're sort of doodling on a bit of paper, and that feels like a safety for them where they're kind of slightly withdrawing, but you can't do that one-on-one in a room, with your therapist necessarily, unless I suppose you've contracted that you're doing some creative work together. But I think Zoom does become a lot more safe in that way, that you can distance yourself from the situation.
I was sharing in my group about how when COVID struck and my classes had to go online, and I had this fear that on the other side of the Zoom, it's not just my students who are listening to me, it's their parents and their siblings. I didn't feel safe. I had to grow I had to desensitize that. It doesn't matter what they do as long as I do my job professionally. And that's what matters at the end of the day. But to start with, it was quite nerve-wracking. Thinking that who are the people listening to me, and are they recording what I'm saying? And I'm going to become an internet meme of something like that. Or
yeah, I mean, I wonder how you can be that present-centered in that situation. So you've got that kind of in your head, isn't it? About, am I doing the right thing? Am I not doing the right thing?
Yeah, I decided not to be that vulnerable, right? So I have to be defensive in some ways so that I'm not exposed too much in what I say, especially, right? Because it can be recorded.
Sometimes the clients are exposed as well because it's in their homes. Potentially, they might have their pets, or sometimes their children or partners come into the scene. Some people only have a very small space, maybe their bedroom, that they can use as private space to talk to you. I think it's actually in some ways a lot more vulnerable to be engaged in that online.
And when Freddie was talking about that experience, he used the words being taken out of, I hope you don't mind, Freddie, being taken out of context. And what went on for me as I was saying, hi, I need to land, I clocked the recording button. And something, then another layer went on, because I thought, in the spirit of co-creative, because that's what I'm here for, that's why I'm coming in. And then I thought, gosh, there's going to be others who I'm not co-creating with, who may be listening at some other point, who are not part of my context here. And I guess that's forefront for me, because the co-creative for me is the fact that attention is paid to context, and almost that three-handed position, that 2+. You know, what are we in? So yeah, I've got I guess I'm still quite jiggled about that. You know, how does that fit? Maybe that's the question. How does that fit co-creatively if we're here creating moment by moment and being present-centered, and we're throwing out a recording?
And I
No
think
fear there at all.
Amy, you talk about jiggly. Jiggly is present-centered in itself. It can be present-centered in itself, accounting for the feeling in the moment, noticing the red button, you know, noticing what Freddie was talking about. Does it resonate with my experience or not? It's not about the good vibes. It's about accounting for what emerges in the dialogue that we have right now.
I think that's what I was thinking about. This, what gets in the way of being present-centered, is that sort of making assumptions about what is going on in the room. So, for example, possibly not to pick on you, Amy, but you say you see the recording button, and then just assuming that you have to even accept that. Like, maybe we need to have a conversation about whether the recording is appropriate or we're comfortable about it. Yes, I think for me, it's those kind of assumptions, you know, like when you're a child thinking, well, I've got to listen to the old adult telling me what to do, or whatever the case may be, or how to behave. Yeah.
And Traian, what you picked up on with Amy is what I talked about in noticing if I'm present-centered. Does my emotional load match the context that I'm in? And if it does, then my emotions or my feelings are present-centered, you know, whether that be fear or sadness or grief or anger or whatever it might be. But if it is not matching the context, or if I'm making assumptions, then it is probably archaic in some shape, way or form. So sometimes what I do is notice my emotional intensity and then think about the context that I'm operating in, or check with people, like, does this warrant this type of emotion? And then I'm like, no, absolutely not. And then I know that actually some of that is baggage that I've got coming up. So I think that's a really, really useful, and emotions absolutely are present, can be present-centered, given the right context.
Yeah, and you know, differentiating between what's present-centered even out of an emotion is you know, the active reflection on it. And I love the fact that you're bringing other people into you checking up on the level of present-centeredness, because I think that's part of the we-ness that we talk about or they talked about initially in the principles. So it's a simple, not simplistic manner of being.
Well, it's also my frame of reference, right? And so I know that my frame of reference, if it's archaic, you know, if I'm taking into consideration the archaic emotions, there's going to be an element of my scripty self thinking this is like okay. So hence the checking is important for me. And you know, whether that be through a peer or a colleague or a supervisor, you know, or all of them. For me, it's really important, because otherwise there's an element for me of being scripty or a drive or a self-sabotage, and kind of being in a not so good place.
Yeah, and it gets me thinking about something that attracts me to co-creative TA and attracted me, this gentleness that co-creativity allows us to have for ourselves. In other words, you know, this is a process of back and forth. It's a process of present moment and past, and it's a constant journey. And we choose to be more present-centered. We choose to do that among, you know, together with others, which for me was really helpful. Also comparing to the more traditional thinking of TA, which almost feels like there's a one-way street. There's no one-way street. There's a constant back and forth and an awareness that's happening. That's present-centeredness for me, and the way I look at it.
I think that's a really good point, Nims, about checking out your emotions and whether they're relevant. Because when those feelings that we get, they're always present-centered. Because we're feeling them at the moment. They are feelings that we're feeling. What we've got to sort out is whether they are appropriate. Yeah. So when we're feeling what our child ego state is feeling, when we're sort of regressed, yeah, in the present, those feelings for us, that scare or feeling shamed or whatever, is a present-centered feeling. But it doesn't mean to say that we're present-centered. And it's doing exactly what you just talked about. And what Keith and Graham talk about in terms of what am I experiencing? Yeah, and where is it coming from? Is it warranted? Yeah, is it or is it something from our past? Is it something that's a defensive response? Is it a protective response?
Yeah, so reading people's minds without checking out what's going on, that sort of, yeah.
Yeah. And I think when we talked earlier, I threw a little bit in about do we work in the transference or with the transference? And if we're working with the transference, we're not actually present-centered. Because one of us at least, if not both of us, are in as a minimum a partial transferential transaction. And if we're working in the transference, we're in a co-transferential transaction. So neither of us is present-centered because we're working in the transference, not with it. So as soon as we start working with the transference and acknowledging it, even if we don't fully expose it, we are inviting adult-to-adult relationship.
I got a little bit lost there. So working with the transference, I thought you said it could not be present-centered, but no, actually you're saying it is present-centered.
Yeah, working with it is inviting present-centeredness. If we work in the transference, we're responding to past-centered stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we work with it,
noticing,
and not in it, and it may be that we work with it because we notice it and work with it rather than work in it. Yeah. So we could notice it and be aware of what the transference is, or what the counter transference is, or what the concordant transference is. And we can choose what we do with it, but we don't have to stay in it. And that was one of the things that Keith and Graham in their original article talked about in the therapeutic context, about bringing the transference into the room. Yeah. And they weren't particularly welcomed with that view. There was quite a bit of criticism about the potential that how could a therapist possibly ever be not present-centered? I mean, goodness me, that's not possible. Yeah. And what they were saying was, yes, it is possible, and it happens, and it's okay. Yeah. And it's okay to say, look, I'm feeling this, I'm getting this transference, I'm getting a counter transference. Yeah, bring it into the room. What's going on? Is it mine or is it yours? Yeah.
I've got a question on this because it's something that came into our group. You're saying bring it into the room, and also when you were saying about our relational needs, I'm just wondering how that works. I can see what you're saying about the co-creative, but my question is how much of your relational needs as a therapist and your feelings and things that you feel should be brought into the therapy room when we're taught to, it's all about the client. I can understand the natural transactions, adult to adult transactions, but I'm just wondering about you bringing how much of your stuff into the room, how much that is warranted in the therapy situation or should happen in the therapy situation when it's about the client.
Yeah, and what Children Summers were saying, with that diamond, we notice the transference. Yeah, we notice the partial transferential transaction that is going on, and we decide how we use it. Yeah. So we don't. Go on.
Could you just show us with a little example of how that might look?
Okay. Shall I just share the screen and get this up again? Where are we? A bit higher up. Okay. So well, I'm not a therapist, so it's difficult for me to use that. But in my work, I can notice, for example, that I am being invited into a symbiosis. I'm being invited to look after somebody. Yeah, for example. And my suppose one of my drivers is to rescue. And it's very easy, or it was very easy for me to look after, yeah, or to provide a solution, yeah. And I would then have been in a co-transferential transaction because I would have been accepting that invite to rescue, yeah. So if I know, as I now do, notice that I'm being invited to provide the solution rather than because the person doesn't want to do the thinking, or the pattern is to get somebody else to do the thinking and come up with a solution. I can notice that, yeah. So I can then decide how I respond to it. So as soon as I notice it and begin to decide how to respond, I am being present-centered. And there are times when I will, as we were talking about earlier on, I think, was it NIMS, and we were talking about using contact doors. So I can notice that invitation and use the contact doors to build up, to improve the communication channels without rescuing. Yeah. So I am then present-centered, and I'm noticing and working in a cross transaction. And for some of that time, I might consciously do a bit of rescuing, but I am consciously aware of it. And Children Summers talked about sometimes it's necessary to stay in the transference in order to get out of it. but what they were saying was you are consciously staying in it. And what you are looking for is an appropriate time to invite the client, the person we're working with, the supervisee, we're looking for an appropriate time when we say, oh, what was going on there then? So you as the responsible person, this not equal responsibility, taking more responsibility. You're taking responsibility to enable those parallel transactions to continue to get to a point where you think, aha, maybe something's emerging now as an opportunity to bring this into the room and explore what was going on. So we move from this co-transferential transactions at the bottom to present me past you. And I'm choosing to stay in it, maybe to work in the transference for a while. And then I choose really to invite the other person out by really bringing it into the room and saying, oh, I noticed I nearly rescued you then. Or I was in the, and I've realized that that's what I was doing. What was going on?
And Paul,
go on.
You know, Katrina, you've mentioned something about, you know, we're taught that it's about the client. Well, part of the co-creative perspective and principles, it's a 2+ psychology. So it is about both of us, if it's a therapeutic relationship, a coaching relationship, a one-on-one relationship, and the context around us and what emerges between us, not saying that we are equal. And that's the shared but not equal responsibility playing along. And Paul, what you're talking about, Paul, is how are we using, or what other resources are emerging when we are accounting for both myself and the client equally, not on equal basis, but equally. So, because there could be other resources that come up in the diamond that could help both I and myself and the client. And this is quite something that's challenging for some other ways of doing, you know, helping interventions and so on. So that's an invitation to be aware of both sides and using resources from that dynamic. And we're gonna touch more on intersubjectivity in another workshop, but it's very much about that. What's co-created.
Ingrid, you were talking about these fantasies we run in our heads about noticing somebody and assuming that's what they're doing, and that's another not present-centered thing about, how do we notice that? How do we bring it in? And actually, as Traian was saying, we learn something about ourselves in the process. And we can not in the exchange, but later on, we can go back to it and think, what was going on for me then? Why was I assuming that this person meant such a thing? Or just because they had a facial expression, why did I go down that road of putting a rationale behind what I was seeing without checking it out? So it works both ways. We as supervisors or therapists or consultants or coaches or counselors, it's a process where we find out about ourselves as well. And that's the shared responsibility. The client often doesn't know that they're helping us.
There was this word intuitive, I think, brought somebody earlier today. I think that's the more natural way of interacting. Perhaps that's why it seems, or it feels intuitive. Perhaps co-creativity just just adds an invitation to this type of interaction, without discounting the ethical aspects of the roles that we have as helping professionals. It's not about that. It's about inviting a different type of connection, contact, being, present-centeredness.
I think the other way of looking at it, Traian, is, you know, sometimes working with the transference is a gentle confrontation for the client about surfacing some of the patterns that they are not aware of, but we are seeing and experiencing in ourselves, and we're playing that back to them. So one of my clients today is a coach working in an organizational context, and it's all about his team and not about him. And one of the parts of our contracts for working together is for him to leave his team metaphorically at the door, and when we're working together it is about him. But it's also for me to notice that pattern and then bring it up and say, I noticed that we're talking about your team again, tell me what's going on for you. So sometimes it is that Shift talks about confrontation, and I think sometimes we can use the transference as a way of gently confronting some of our clients' patterns that they might not be aware of, in order to increase their awareness of what's going on for them and being able to talk about it.
Yes, and it's an end to what you're saying, Names. How is our contract co-creatively developed so the client can also bring up if he or she is noticing the same in me? That's the big difference. I totally agree with what you're saying. And how am I reachable as a practitioner to receive the same type of input or feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I talked about this client with is that some of the context that he's bringing, I find seductive. So I could find myself talking about the context and not about my client. And I invited my client to call me out, in inviting him to say, notice if I'm doing this. So, for me, I developed a co-creative contract, for his awareness that actually this for me could be really exciting from a OD perspective, from a work perspective. And for him, I think there's an opportunity for us almost to get in a place where it's not useful, but he's aware of what I feel could happen, and I'm aware of what what could happen for him.
It's a mutuality.
It's a mutuality, and we both know what some of our kind of triggers are and where we could go given this particular context or this particular challenge that he's bringing. Yes,
and in a nutshell, we're talking about not holding the knowledge, because it's actually an irony, holding the knowledge in the present centeredness way of looking at it. What knowledge? No. What's emerging? Yeah, thanks, Nims. That's great.
And what emerges is important, because it is emerging, and it's emerging for a reason. And by ignoring it and working in it and not with it, we're missing a lot of information, and we are potentially supporting the client to miss a lot of information.
And change their patterns, yeah.
Yeah, so we're without challenging them, we're reinforcing those patterns. Yeah, we're maintaining that unhealthy safety, that archaic safety that was generated when they didn't have the power that they now have. Come on, Lee, how are you doing? Are you getting some clues?
No, I am. Quite humorously, you caught me in a moment of just drifting. I think I go between the tension of understanding this present-centeredness and co-creative TA intellectually and also experientially. So it's, for me now, getting that balance now, which I tend to go towards more the intellectual. So yeah, I mean, with the understanding what it is and how it feels, it, from what I've heard everyone speak of and what you've both spoke of, it resonates with my own experience, and and that's it at the moment. Yeah.
I mean, what my experience is that if we face those challenges, we, a bit like Harple did, we feel great afterwards. You feel sort of lighter and not as weighed down by our script that we carry around. It's sort of really freeing up, and it's like, wow, I can do this. Yeah, I don't have to do that anymore. And in the break, Traian and myself, we're talking about people who go to work day on day and complain about going to work. Yeah, isn't it awful? I've got to turn up here. Yeah. Oh, it's all, and when we're present-centered, we acknowledge it's awful, and we acknowledge we're doing it because we're going to get paid and we've got a contract. And actually, it's a lot better because we know we're choosing to do it, even though we might not like it. Yeah, so it's that present-centered accounting for the fact, oh, I'm fed up of coming to work. Oh, isn't it awful? Well, it is, but I've got a contract and I get paid every month, and it pays the mortgage, and I can buy the food and I can buy the kids' clothes, and well, maybe it's worth it. Yeah, and if it's not worth it, I could do something about it. I don't just have to complain. So you want to say more, Traian?
Yeah, it's about, I remember we were talking about the process of accounting for what's not present-centered. And it's in this example of not wanting to go to work or complaining and whatnot, it's not about feeling good of going to work. It's not about that. It's about accounting for the different reasons of why we go to work, and out of that process, options can emerge.
Yeah.
But in this process, in the between of us reflecting and choosing options, is the bit of accounting and hopefully accepting what's going on.
Can I just add to that? I'm thinking of the liminal space, and a few words keep flying around in my head. So, and it's the freedom within the awareness. And I love the way you've just said the options and choices, because that's exactly how I feel. Because actually, in that awareness of you saying, yeah, well, okay, for instance, about the work, my work is, pretty shit. I don't like going in. But here I am, I'm aware of it. It is shit. And it is this. But in knowing that, yeah, I've just created some freedom to say, well, I've got a choice to go. I could do this and I could do that. And then it's, within that space, we can explore it or stay in it. Because that's exactly how I feel. And it's the permission also developed in there to do so. I can give myself permission to do this because I'm in that awareness. Does that make sense? Am I making sense? Because I'm in the present-centered moment. I'm in the moment and I'm no longer scared. I'm confronting it. I'm in it. And yeah, and that's so freeing, because we often get stuck in our thoughts, in our fear and blah, blah, blah. And in doing so, how can we create? You know, we can't create with fear. So yeah, I would just say, yeah, that's you know, how it felt for me. And I felt enlivened by that, actually. So,
Yeah.
you know, knowing that I've got options, choices, and a space to create.
Yeah.
I wonder for me as well, that sort of like, so you talk about the process of accounting for what is not present-centered, and well, you might do that, I'm asking, right? You might do that by sort of checking in with yourself, like why you're doing it, or what you're getting out of not changing the pattern, or is that also how you'd maybe work with a client, like what is the benefit for you being stuck in this situation? Or
all of that. And I mean, if you, I really like Jack Meziro's writing and his process for dealing with stuckness. He refers to it as a disconcerting dilemma. And we often have the dilemma and we choose to ignore it because we stay in the pattern. And what he talks about is facing the dilemma, not just leaving it and complaining about it. Yeah, I have to go to work. Yeah, I've got to do this. Well, no, you don't. Yeah, you have a choice, and there are consequences. But he talks about the process of facing that. One is acknowledging the dilemma and then facing it. And working through it is to explore the feelings of anger, guilt, fear, and shame. And he, in his process, he talks about there will be one of those, that's really getting in the way. And my experience is that there's always all four of them, and they are layered. So they're a bit like onion rings, and different levels of script beliefs and different levels of rackets. We've got a racket covering a deeper racket, which covers a deeper racket, which covers a deeper script belief. And I think what I've found is that those four feelings are in the layers. Yeah. So but people can often find quite easily, oh, I feel scared. Yeah. Or I feel angry, or whatever, or I feel guilty, and it's the fourth one that's the real bottom. Yeah. So I'll often work with people and it can take a while to get underneath them, but to stay with it and really explore the ones that they're not coming out with, because and the reason for that is that they're so well defended at a non-conscious level. Yeah, we're really good at keeping the lid on that real deep one, and we've no idea that we're doing it. But if you've not seen the Meziro process, check it out, Jack Meziro. It's a 10-point process for facing a dilemma and working through and changing, making different decisions.
I wanted to pick up, Paul, on something that Ingrid just said. You were asking what, why, and so on. And the irony of the present-centeredness is we need to allow some time for it to emerge and we recognize it. So in other words, with the example of the work and what we don't want to do and so on, there needs some time for it to show up in all its glorious options that we might have. So it's not really rushing it. And sometimes you do rush it and sometimes you don't, but the waiting, the spending time into recognizing the present moment, the present-centeredness is something that it's part of the learning. I've experienced it, others have experienced it. So it's great to follow up on the option, and it's equally important to allow the time, ironically, for the present moment to arise.
Yeah, okay, so you couldn't do it at the beginning of starting with a client, for example, because you need to develop that relationship. But I suppose, I mean, I hear you, because actually maybe sometimes I might get into actually kind of trying to rush somebody to where I think they need to go, but actually slow down and allow the process to, I don't know, work itself through a bit slower. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure where I'm going to go with this. So something that Lee said around the tension of intellectually understanding it and experientially understanding it takes me right back to, I think I was still in the carpool when you said the present-centeredness is about expanding the adult, not deconfusing the child. So for me, this is a prime example of that tension for me, because experientially, that means for me that I am working with my client in the room here and now and dealing with whatever is past in the present, right?
Yeah.
I'm speaking, I don't know, whatever's past in the present. So that makes sense to me. However, then on the intellectual level of, it's about expanding the adult rather than deconfusing the child. I'm thinking, well, if I'm not deconfusing the child, what's going on? And there's something in the first chapter of their book, I don't know who wrote it, but they use, they say something about CCTA is that the archaic states are defenses to be deconstructed rather than deconfused or redecided. So I've gone from my experiential to the intellectual, what the hell? And I don't know whether I've gone into asking you to go into your rescuer role now, Paul.
No. It's a normal question. It's a really normal question to come up. So what they're saying is, I mean, one of the bases of co-creativity is constructivism. And what they are talking about there is that you don't have to deconfuse the child. It doesn't have to be a redecision. It can be changing the story. It can be updating the story. So I can acknowledge that I didn't get a lot of strokes from my dad when I was little. Yeah. And actually, I resented it for a long time. But now I can look back at it and say, well, actually, he didn't know how to give strokes. So I've changed the narrative. So I'm telling a different story now than I used to do. So I don't need to go back and redecide. I can acknowledge that it was a sensible decision to make at the time, but it was an inappropriate one.
Yeah, on you. So was that co-created? Because I'm hearing that as you putting a hindsight rationality potentially on what was in the past, but what was ever in the past was co-created between you and your dad. So there were two.
No, it wasn't co-created between me and my dad. It was a symbiotic relationship, so it wasn't present-centered.
Okay.
So a lot of people talk about whatever it is we do is co-created. Well, it's not. It's only co-created if we're both adults, if we're both present-centered.
So you say expanding the adult, is that not similar to decontamination?
But it can be, but it doesn't have to be. So we can tell a different story. I've just explained the story that I've changed, and I didn't have to go through a decontamination process to do that. I acknowledged that that was my decision for a good reason when I was little. I don't have to undo it.
From what I understand with the deconstructing and deconfusion of the child, I'm relating it to the one ego state model of health versus the three. Whereas since we're in the CCTA, we're not trying to get a healthy child and parent. We're looking just to expand the integrating adult. To then deconfuse the child would be unnecessary, because you're looking to expand the adult where the only health is. Yeah. That's how I'm understanding that.
Yeah. So you're sort of overwriting, yeah, rather than going back and changing the original story. You don't have to understand everything. Yeah. You can overwrite it.
Yeah, you wouldn't be healing it necessarily an archaic part of yourself. You'd be looking just to expand the present integrating adult. Yeah. So yeah.
I think Keith has a really good phrase for it, or paraphrase. He says, you can't change an unhappy childhood. What you can do is not let it impede you moving forward positively.
But recognize it, have empathy for it, and no, carry on. Yeah.
So that sense of redefining, instead of being defined by that pattern, we're rewriting and redefining what that past was.
No. Well, we're rewriting the story. We're changing the narrative.
I'm not sure what distinction you're making between deconstructing and deconfusing, because I would understand that awareness of what happened between you and your dad and your decision not to hold on to that experience understood in that way as a child and write the different story, understand it differently. That for me would be deconfusion.
It could be. It doesn't have to. What I'm saying is, it doesn't have to be. It can be, but it doesn't have to be.
I don't understand what difference you're making. This is I was saying in the breakout room, I'm a bit new to co-creative TA, and I come from the classical TA background and trained in that. And I'm interested primarily, I suppose, in working with transference rather than in, which is why I'm interested in this model. I do find it quite confusing, like how it's that different from the classical TA model. And this is just an example of it. You're saying it's not reducible to deconfusion, but what else?
You don't have to deconfuse to tell us to tell a different story. To expand the adult, you don't have to deconfuse.
But the example you gave seems to me to be an example of deconfusion. That's what I don't quite get.
Well, I don't. For me, it wasn't deconfusing or decontaminating. It's just I accepted that that's what the situation was, and for a reason that I didn't understand.
Would it make sense to say, instead of changing the story, looking at the story in a different way?
Yeah, different perspective. Yeah, so third-party perspective instead of my original perspective.
So isn't that a form of reframing your narrative?
Yeah.
Again, yeah. See, what I'm hearing, Paul, is very clearly from you is that you, found it difficult, couldn't change it, but made it so that it was okay for you, because there are many things that we've got to accept about our parents. And me being Indian, there's lots of things that they do culturally that I cannot accept, while I'm living in this country, and I'm thinking, what kind of sense does that make? But there is an acceptance. It doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't sit right with me. However, I feel like I've had to reparent myself along the way and make choices for myself and for my daughter, because I've got to make that sense for me. And I think part of that is to stay in the present sometimes and say, you know, how is it for me? I ask that question to myself a lot. How is it for me? And actually that centers me, and I do sit with it and think, right, yeah, how is it for me? Because we're not used to being asked that question, because it's always like, I mean, it always kind of goes back to either my past or what I know, blah, blah, blah. But now it's all about that isn't for you, because that wasn't you, because I'm co-creating myself, to be, you know, that's the way I look at it. So I know it doesn't make sense maybe to others, but what you're saying, Paul, does gel with me, because I'm all up for this new way of thinking. It doesn't have to be like that. How is it for me, and how can I make it better for myself?
And it is confusing, Mary. Yeah, it is. It's really difficult to get your head around the differences. So don't rush it. It will emerge. At some point, a light will go on, and you'll say, "Oh, right, okay, yeah." But it is a normal response. Yeah.
Paul, would it help to say that, you know, you earlier mentioned about working in transference and working with transference. Working with transference would be the change of story, whereas working in transference is a kind of a regression work.
Yeah.
Where that's deconfusing the child. Now, this change of story can happen one way or the other, but this one exclusively is the change of story, but the other one involves working in transference or a regression work.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think to add to this, it might lead to the same results somehow. It's the intention that we're going into the process which is different.
Yeah.
One is the intention of the confusion. One is the intention of expanding the adult and being aware of what's happening in the present moment. And if it makes sense to do what I've been doing when I was a kid, it's a nice coincidence. But is it relevant for what's happening in the present moment? Is it useful for what's happening in the present moment? So it's almost a different entry point and a different intention when we're using these different frames of reference. One is deconfusion, one is expanding the adult.
I feel like it's you're much more able to keep the okayness about yourself and other people with this model. It's not completely different, like, oh my God, you're presenting something different, but it just allows you to kind of be a lot more kind of empathic towards yourself in a way. So I felt with those kind of three ego states all stacked on top of each other and everything was not integrated unless it was a bit messed up and confused, that there is quite a lot of potential for judgment on yourself as well, like why am I not, you know, being more adult? I don't know, I just think it feels much more generous to people, to yourself.
Yeah, for me, it provides more options.
Yeah.
Options means freedom. I'm going to keep banging on about that word. And isn't it again related to the we-ness as well? I'm understanding that a little bit better now. So I really like that comment, Ingrid, and that I think that wraps it up quite nicely for me at the end of the day on how we frame it.
Yeah, and I think the we-ness is important because you can't do this change on your own. You need some support. You know, with Meziro's process, it's really difficult to work through it on your own. You need to be in relationship and share the responsibility. And I can see Traian's looking at the clock.
Yes, because there are words emerging which I cannot help than to remind myself, you know, wrapping up and the time and so on. So Paul, we're thinking of using the last 10-15 minutes to wrap up the session, and we only have 4.
Yeah.
But we're gonna be more allowing tonight. So how about doing a round the table with what emerged for you today, what you're left with, what do you want to bring to yourself and to the ones around you after today?
And if you need to go at past, you need to go. So, and we're not going to go straight away. So.
I mean, I can start. I feel like what I've got out of this is I've got much more of a feeling sense of the concepts of co-relational, co-creative, or co-whatever. I don't know. Person-centered, whatever. So that's been really good. So kind of losing that intellectual, I need to understand it, get much more of a sense of how perhaps it feels in terms of work and personal development. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel more enlightened, I suppose, and I feel that it will make me more relaxed in my work, really, and more, gives me permission to just to go with the flow, really.
Yeah, I think one of the things about co-creative TA is it's the process that's important.
The emerging process.
I'm going to say, oh, sorry, go on.
It's okay. I've really enjoyed just how we've all kind of bounced from different topics in CTTA. It's been really useful because I've got a whole bunch of this theory in my head, and to kind of help it start to piece together, it's been really useful in this experiential way as well, which I'm noticing it's quite lovely, especially for this topic, the discrepancy I have at times of being present-centered within my own, I don't know if that's even possible, within my own thoughts, but also within myself and then with others. And I can notice a discrepancy, and that's my own script stuff coming up, but it gets highlighted doing this work, having it online, having that platform, that space to bring myself forward in this different way as opposed to being in person. So it's been really useful to have an experience of being present-centered with you all, as well as with the theory alongside it. And I felt like there was a good emphasis for me on the experiential side of it as well. So yeah, I've appreciated that. And yeah, I'm gonna need to go as well. So thank you to everyone.
Thanks for getting up so early.
All right, thank you. See ya.
Cheers, bye.
I want to account for what emerged co-creatively in this group today, where we started from compared to the starting point, and where we are as a group, and personally where I started from and where I am in my understanding. I recognize that it is a process. It's an emergent process, one of continuously happening. And I think I have a little bit more compassion for myself today after today's session. I feel okay in my mess. I like it. I like it.
That's heartwarming. Thanks for sharing it, Freddie.
Yeah.
Freddie, I think I might co-creatively join you in your mess, which is just such a beautiful way of it coming. And just thank you so much, guys. Arriving late for me. I'm taking away permissions. Energy, surprisingly, at this time of day for me, and daring, along with a smidgen of clarity. So thank you.
I'm going to use a different type of metaphor, but linked to yours, Amy and Freddie. And I'm comfortable with my jumble. It's a bit of a jumble at the moment. I'm accustomed to working organically and emergently, so I really appreciated the way in which you made concepts come alive, which is a phrase that I use, come alive, and modeled co-creativity in the moment, co-creative, sharing and learning in the moment, including the discussion that went on in the breakout rooms and how that was played with, and I use that word purposely. So how I'm leaving is, whilst perhaps not as demonstratively, I can hardly say it, as others, my mind and my body is buzzing, my fingertips are tingling, and I'm just feeling really excited, in as much that, yeah, I can see how exploring this even further, I'm going to have fun with it, and there doesn't need, it's about the process of doing it, and yeah, just and the fact that it's about the word is we-ness, but it's about togetherness, and of itself, with my clients and other people that I work with, that of itself is organic and emergent, and anything can happen and all is okay. Yeah. So that's what I'm left with.
Great.
I'll go. I am actually very hungry right now. I thought I'd want to share that with people. Being present-centered and paying attention to my needs. Yeah, it was a really good session. I mean, probably, we've been working together for two years, and it's, for me, nice to kind of add on a little bit more, particularly around the transference bit, because we've touched on that. So I got more clarity because I was working on my own jumble, to use your words, Sandra. It's parts of it is a jumble to me, and I love that. I think there is something nice about the co-creativity, but for me, it's about giving it the space to emerge, because there's often a habit of filling it with our script, and we're so used to doing that rather than leaving an open space or the aspect of being. So for me, I'm taking away about, what can I do in my work to let things unfold or emerge, as opposed to just filling it with the usual patterns. So I'm taking that away.
Right.
Okay. Anybody else wants to share?
You don't have to.
Okay, I was just going to say very quickly, because I've already said quite a lot. I've got a lot out of this, and I feel I trust myself in the process, in the present moment, and it's okay to go with the fear. And just a few words that come up, which is, yeah, again, permission, freedom, reframing, changing, allowing, yeah, and being spontaneous as well. It's a gift. So thank you.
You're welcome.
You're very welcome.
Yeah.
So for this time, we're going to continue with other sessions on other topics. Paul, anything you'd like to add to the forum?
I've just really enjoyed it. Yeah. I'm sorry for being scary.
Yes, but I felt the fear and I did it anyway. I think you were a real trigger for me, that I thought, if I'm scared of you, then I need to do even more. So I don't, yeah, I mean, obviously that's archaic, isn't it? Going back in the past, and I thought, yes, but how is it for me in the present? He's not really scary. You're not really nice.
You'd be surprised.
I feel enlivened by that. Lovely. Yay. Bring it on, Paul. No, but thank you for that.
No,
and even the word acceptance comes up again as well. So that's really important for me. So thank you both again. Wonderful.
Welcome.
Yeah.
And thanks for the willingness to co-create. Sandra, or who wants?
Sorry, can I just ask you, what was the name of that, the surname of that man, Jack?
Meziro.
How do you spell it?
Oh, I put that in there, didn't I?
Meziro. Google him. There's lots of stuff, and it's really good.
Mezzi. Right, okay. M-E-Z-I.
Yeah.
I'm going to be very present-centered, and usually at the first sign of somebody saying, and tell us what you've learned from the session, and I would just go bink, and I would just want to leave and go. I've sat with the uncomfortableness. I still don't feel like I've got anything to say apart from this, but for me, it's huge just staying with that and staying present with that and seeing what's going on for me around wanting to just press the button and go bing, and staying with it and feeling that kind of sense of the wobble, being in that wobble zone. So thanks everybody for making this space feel safe to be able to say that.
Thanks for being courageous enough to share it. Great. There are plenty more coming up. The program's about another nine months. So there's lots and lots of different aspects that are coming up. Just keep your eye on the UK. If you're a UCATA member, you'll get a notification. If you're not, then just keep your eye on the UCATA site.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming
Bye all.
and joining in.
Thank you
so much, everyone.
Appreciate it. Thank you all.